I'm going to go over our Lyceum guidelines and expectations with you all. So show respect and courtesy of our presenters and your fellow peers. Everyone's camera must remain on throughout the duration of the Lyceum. You will be dismissed without warning if you exhibit the following: screaming or foul language, inappropriate presentation on screen. Your camera is turned off. You are not visible on screen unless using the restroom. And I understand that we're all adults, so you don't have to tell me that you're using the restroom. I'm just going to take the honor code that you're doing what you're supposed to. At this time, I want everyone to ensure that your mobile device or your electronic device is charging, so we can kind of alleviate any mishaps with technology not working. At the end of the Lyceum, the assessment quiz link for credit will be placed in the chat box. Make sure you stay on the webinar to receive that link. There will be an additional 5 minutes given to access that code before the webinar ends. Failure to complete the assessment quiz will result in you not receiving credit. And if you all have any questions, again, you can contact me at lyceum@wingate.edu, or you can actually directly message me in the chat box. For today's presentation, for your questions, we're going to hold it to the end. If you do have any questions, you can directly connect with me or Dr. Dubé in the chat box with the questions that you have. At this moment, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you, such a big group tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the Department of Public Health at Wingate University, my name is Dr. Shanta Dubé. I'm a professor. I'm the director of the MPH program. And also on this Lyceum is Dr. Wolf, our director, founding director of the Department of Public Health and the public health programs at Wingate University. What we're going to do today is give you a flavor of our program and actually allow you to really understand kind of what a public health program, what we do, what our curriculum is about. And then we're going to have two presenters today. Dr. Daniel Roberts is going to talk about Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen. And we'll have Ms. Susan Saganga, who is one of our MPH students, one of the first in our first inaugural cohort that started fall 2021. And she's going to share with you her experience in the applied practice experience. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of our program and then hand it over to Dr. Roberts. So this is, oops, sorry, my slide didn't go there. This is a overview of our faculty. I have to tell you, it's grown significantly. Dr. Wolf is the director. Dr. Wolf, would you like to say a few words while I have you on here?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all this evening. So happy that you all could join our Lyceum presentation featuring the MPH program, Dr. Roberts, and our student, Susan Saganga. So great to see you and thank you.
So we were actually 3 faculty and we've grown significantly. Dr. Badmus is the Director of Medical and Community Partnership. She and I work very closely together on the applied practice experience, which you're going to hear a lot about this evening. Dr. Knopf is in the Sociology Department. And then we have a new faculty that just joined us this fall, Dr. Orion Akinzo. We also have 2 adjunct faculty that help to instruct our MPH courses. So this makes up our Department of Public Health faculty, if you will, teachers and instructors. So what does public health look like at Wingate? Dr. Wolf, would you like to say a few words about our overall framework for the public health department?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an undergraduate degree, the Bachelor's of Science in Public Health, and then our graduate degree, a Master's in Public Health, which is a fully online program, primarily asynchronous. And then we have a unique 4+1 pathway for a dual degree, BSPH, MPH. And so those are our current degree offerings.
So today's presentation, as I mentioned, is focusing a little bit more on the graduate program. And in terms of the graduate program and undergraduate program, there's a lot that our department actually offers to the Wingate, not just the students, but the surrounding Wingate community, you know, outside of our university. We do a lot of partnering and community engagement with the health departments, as well as non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, and other, if you will, other entities that really strive to work with vulnerable populations that demonstrate health disparities or have significant health issues, and hence why we're going to have Dr. Roberts talk a lot about and inform us about his organization and the work he's doing. We also collaborate with the other health sciences programs at Wingate. And most importantly, our program is developing and has developed and implemented service-based learning opportunities. And that's somewhere where the applied practice experience comes in, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my next slide. The wonderful thing about our MPH program, as Dr. Wolf noted, is it's fully online and it's asynchronous, meaning it's really self-directed. So students can view the videotaped lectures at their convenience and time. It's very flexible for full-time individuals who are full-time working. And so just wanted to give you a flavor of our graduate program in the public health department. The other feature I just want to highlight is I showed you that picture of our faculty. We are an interdisciplinary faculty, meaning we all come from a variety of backgrounds. We have a physician, we have a physician assistant, Dr. Wolf, Doctor of Public Health, that's Dr. Kinzo, myself. I've done a lot of public health research and practice. And as I mentioned, Dr. Knope, she is actually a medical sociologist. So students really get an opportunity to get a vast array of experience and knowledge through the MPH program. So what does it look like? It's a 42 credit program. It can be completed full-time over 2 years, but we do offer flexible plans of study where students can actually take part in it part-time. The students' eligibility are students who have earned an undergraduate degree, and then Wingate University undergraduate students in the 4+1 have an opportunity to finish their bachelor's and then go straight into the MPH program. And what does our curriculum look like? All of you might have probably over the last 2.5 years heard about epidemiology at length, because within the COVID pandemic, you probably heard on the news and on all kinds of media outlets, epidemiologists talking about the prevalence, the dynamics of COVID. So our curriculum integrates that whole field, epidemiology and biostatistics, qualitative and quantitative research methods, and more heavily focused on health education and promotion. So really understanding how do we deliver interventions to those populations really in need of specific interventions to prevent health conditions. And then we also have in our integrated curriculum components around understanding how policies are developed and evaluated. And then the final year, so you get all of that in your coursework, and then the final year is your applied practice experience. So what is an applied practice experience? It's essentially the last part of the MPH where students get placed, identify and get placed at a site. It could be a county health department. It could be a non-governmental organization, any kind of an organization or entity that's working and striving to work with populations and conduct evidence-based public health activities, interventions, policy development programs. So that is the MPH program in a nutshell. I just want to give a brief background on some of the research I did early on in my public health career after I attained my MPH. When I attained my MPH, I applied for a fellowship at the CDC, and I worked as a preventive medicine fellow on the CDC Kaiser Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is one, to tell you some of the opportunities MPH students might have after earning a MPH degree, working at the CDC, working at local health departments, serving as public health analysts, data analysts. But what I really wanted to highlight is the research, because it actually is a bridge to what Dr. Roberts is going to present. So the ACE study actually looked at early life adversities in the form of abuse, neglect, household challenges. And some of the other adversities that have been looked at are bullying, community violence, natural disasters, and other kinds of psychological or emotional factors that can impede development and growth of an individual. And then what we also found in the study that we worked on is that ACEs can actually increase the risk for lots of health outcomes. So that's why this study is important, because it really outlines and provides the foundation for understanding how adversities in different forms, traumatic experience, can actually impact our health and our well-being across a lifespan. But the wonderful thing is there is growth and resiliency. And so now I'm going to stop and let Dr. Roberts present on his work that he is doing currently. So Dr. Roberts, and please tell me when I should change your slides as you're going through your presentation.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, good. So I'm Dr. Daniel L. Roberts. I'm the president and CEO of Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen Incorporated, as you can see on the slide. And I hope that you're having a great evening. I hope you've been enjoying this beautiful North Carolina fall weather with lots of sun and low humidity and low cool temperatures. Won't last long, I'm sure. We'll be in the thick of winter before you know it. But in the meantime, I hope you're getting out and enjoying some time in the sunshine while you're doing your schoolwork. And what I'll talk about tonight, a little bit about moral injury. I'll touch on that just for those of you that have never heard that term. But mostly I'm going to talk about what we do, Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen Incorporated, as it relates to public health. And our nickname, or our short name, is Missions. And that's an acronym of the whole name, but also missions, because we're talking about servicewomen, military women. They relate to mission. We're in the military, you're always on a mission. So we are on a mission to help servicewomen and families. Next slide, please. All right, so tonight our agenda: what is moral injury? We'll talk about mission, our services, how we got started, the importance of advocacy and research, and our current operations, what our current projects are right now. And I understand there'll be questions at the end. So as we're going through that, if you have some questions, note those for later at the end, or you can put things in the chat and Dr. Dubé will respond to it as appropriately. Next slide. All right, so what is moral injury? Moral injury is fairly recent terms in terms of research. There has been some work done on moral injury over the last decade or two, and now a lot more work in research is being done on it. But in terms of things like PTSD and other kind of mental health factors, moral injury is a relatively new term. It happens when someone experiences a very traumatic event, right, that violates his or her deeply held moral beliefs. And you don't have to be religious to experience a moral injury. We all have beliefs about the world and how it should work and what's right and what's wrong. So some kind of a traumatic event that violates that in a very deep way, like a sexual assault, for instance, is something we refer to a moral injury. Now, it is a complex phenomenon. There's a lot of parts to it. It can happen in a lot of different ways, but it is closely related to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of the symptoms, there are some overlapping symptoms, and you can have both moral injury and PTSD, absolutely. Some of the symptoms that have been associated with moral injury include guilt, shame, loss of identity, loss of self-worth. There are lots of others, and our research has looked at moral injury in women veterans. We're currently doing a project on moral injury in spouses of military service members. More on that in a little bit. But if you've never heard the term moral injury, but you just think about it for a minute and think about those two elements, right? You have a traumatic event, something you experience, something you witness, something you're the target of, even something you participate in, and it's something that you feel is deeply wrong. So, for instance, moral injury was originally conceptualized by Jonathan Shea, working with veterans returning home from Vietnam. Because of what they saw and experienced in combat, they were really, really struggling to feel like to recover from that because of this deep sense of moral wrongness that they felt. Next slide. And certainly, if you have questions or would like to discuss moral injury more deeply, by all means, we'll hopefully have some good time for questions later. So what is Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen Incorporated's mission? Well, in short, it's to transform the lives of millions of women, veterans, and families affected by moral injury. So we recognize that that military women can experience moral injury in a lot of different ways. And again, like Jonathan Shea first conceptualized it as something that can happen in combat, but over time we've recognized through research there are a lot of other ways that this can happen. And when I was originally started working on moral injury as a research problem, I recognized there was very little research that really centered on the experiences of women in moral injury. And so that became our mission. But I also include families in that because, if there's certainly potential for other members of a family to be affected. And I'll give you a quick example. When one of the participants in our study, she was morally injured by her spouse, who had been morally injured by a sexual assault that occurred earlier in her career. So that person who is very deeply wounded, often the rage, the anger, sometimes the uncontrolled emotions, then her spouse became the target of that, and that was also moral injurious. So our mission focuses on those lives. Next slide. What are our services? So one, we do training and continuing education, and we focus our training and continuing education around several populations of people: chaplains, psychologists, social workers, public health practitioners like Dr. DeBay, Dr. Wolf, etc., and medical doctors. So people that are working with veterans, because our mission again is veterans, people that are working with veterans in both the mental health, spiritual, and physical health fields, all have the potential to come in contact with morally injured people. And that even includes people like physical therapists, occupational therapists, nurses. And so we try to, because moral injury is a universal human condition, right? Since there have been humans on the earth, they have been harming each other and doing things wrong to each other. Then moral injury is one of those elements that has many tentacles. Like it can be applicable. Many professions can find applicability to moral injury. If you're working with people, it's in the health field, or a related field, then knowing something about moral injury is really helpful. So our training and continuing education through our annual comprehensive moral injury conference that happens in June every year. Moral injury spiritual aid training, which is specifically for chaplains. The conference is for all those people I mentioned: nurses, psychologists, social workers, chaplains, and we provide continuing education. So for many of those fields, continuing education hours are required. And so our annual conference provides 12 hours of continuing education hours for many of those fields. Not all of them yet, but we do, psychologists, social workers, chaplains, nurses are the main ones we're targeting this year, maybe even medical doctors, depending on if we can get someone on the planning committee to help with that. All right. And then continuing education through partners. So other nonprofit organizations that are doing continuing education, such as Maryland Behavioral Health, Summit Behavioral Health, like these organizations are partners because they put on a continuing education program. They put on a conference, and I spoke at that conference, or I did a workshop at that conference. And so, we're still providing continuing education through those partners. They're doing the organizing, they're doing the, the supporting, hosting, etc. And I'm just providing the workshop. So those are how we do training and continuing education. Then we have 2 research projects, moral injury and women veterans, and that is where we're developing a theory of moral injury in women veterans. Right now, there is no overarching theory about moral injury in women veterans specifically. And in that project, we gathered data from 50 women veterans through semi-structured interviews and surveys. So we're in the process of analyzing that tons and tons of data. The other research project is moral injury in military spouses. This is where we're exploring moral injurious experiences and spouses of military service men or women who have PTSD. So a military person with PTSD, if they have a spouse or an ex-spouse, ex-partner, etc. So a lot of different, they don't have to be married to the person. They don't have to be a woman. They could be a male spouse. It could be a non-traditional or non-heterosexual couple. Like none of that doesn't matter. What the main criteria is, if you're a spouse, ex-spouse, partner, ex-partner of a military service member who was diagnosed with PTSD, should have been diagnosed with PTSD, or might have been diagnosed with PTSD, then they can take partner studies. So that is a research project that we're doing in partnership with Thomas Jefferson University. And we're early in that process. We've done some interviews, about 7 interviews. And so we're looking for more participants there. Then the other part that we do is called direct support. Through our Tubman Chaplain Network, named after Harriet Tubman, we have a network of chaplains, just women. All the chaplains are women, and we provide chaplaincy support to women, people who identify as women. So the reason why we do that is because we recognize that 95% of military chaplains are men, and that not all women feel comfortable, getting support from a male chaplain. Not all women feel comfortable asking for chaplain support through their unit chaplain. And some chaplains are better than others. So this chaplain network is completely unaffiliated with the military or the VA, and it is a volunteer network of highly qualified, highly educated chaplains who are women volunteering volunteering to provide spiritual and religious support to women, to people who self-identify as women and military women. Next slide. Okay, so how we got started. I was finishing up my dissertation in the dissertation centered around chaplaincy support to wounded women, military chaplain support to women who had been wounded during an overseas deployment. And I gathered all the data. I had written up my dissertation. I was putting that one in the book, so to speak, or putting it on the shelf. And I heard a talk, a workshop, a training, if you would, from Dr. Harold Koenig, who is very, very well-known researcher in the moral injury field at Duke University. And he came to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I'm serving and as in the chaplaincy there, and gave a talk on moral injury. And I realized that from hearing his talk, I'd never heard that term before. I said, hey, this is really important. And I, looking at the research that was out there, I said, hey, there's nothing on women, research that specifically focuses on women. So I began to develop a research project that would look at moral injury in women. As I gathered that data and began to look at it, I said, hey, because I was hearing some very, very traumatic, very difficult, hard to hear stories from women who had been sexually assaulted, who had experienced all kinds of moral injuries in the military, from a wide variety of things, from combat to extreme disrespect, hazing, physical violence, all these kind of things. And I realized that, we need to get the word out better about what moral injury is when it comes to women, what they're dealing with. And so we began, this is just me still. I began to put together a conference, and I started finding people on the committee, and just realized, this work that we're doing, it's research, it's education, it's training, it's support. Hey, that's nonprofit work. That's why nonprofits are created. That's what a nonprofit is. By law, is an organization that engages in research, education, charity, those kind of things. So that was the next step, saying, hey, we need to establish a nonprofit organization that's the right business model for this kind of work, so we can go after grants and we can ask people to donate, that sort of thing, right? And then the next question was, well, what name should we give it, right? And so that very long name was my own invention, but I wanted a name that would really speak to people immediately about what it is we do. And so I think it does that. You can see our name and see that, hey, we're about providing support to women who have been morally injured. It's all in the name there. And the good thing, giving myself some pats on the back for that name, is that often people, we've been fortunate to be able to hire a number of interns and volunteers just because they read the name and said, that sounds like something important. That sounds like an important work I'd be interested in. So that's how we got started. Next slide. Next slide. I think I'll come back to, let me see what the next one is. Yeah, okay, go back one slide then, if you will. All right, the importance of advocacy and research. So from my perspective, right, talking about research real quick. there are times that you think, I've been practicing in the chaplaincy in the Army Chaplain Corps since 2002. So that's 20 years if my math is right. And so I know a lot, right? I feel like I know a lot about chaplains. I know a lot about soldiers and how to care for people. But I don't know everything. And there were a lot of things that I learned through the process of research. So the importance of research is that it opens our minds to things that we didn't know, right? Obviously, but when you hear other people's story, when you hear others' experiences, right? When you hear others about their life, then it changes you, right? It changes the way you think about what you thought you knew. And so that's why it's important that we do research that focuses on specific populations. That's why we do women research or LGBTQ research focusing on those specific, or men or whatever, right? It's important that we don't just throw everybody into a big pot, a big research pot that we just kind of stir and try to create this result or this program that just works for everybody. And so it's important to conduct focused research, identifying specific populations so that you can then create programs, help, resources, etc., for those specific groups without our own implicit bias and our own blind spots and that kind of thing. All right, so and then advocacy is about getting that specific group into the consciousness of others who don't have experience with that group or who stand outside that group, and helping them understand what that group needs and what that group, how to support that group, and how that group is just as human, just as important, whatever the case, as others. And so that's why advocacy and research is important in so many different ways. Next slide. So here's what we're doing right now. The 5 main projects that we're involved in right now, or main efforts. And we have a variety of things throughout the year, but this is what's happening right now within the organization. One, we're conducting planning for the Comprehensive Moral Injury Conference. And again, like I mentioned, that provides continuing education credits for those groups that I mentioned. But it's also about broadening the scope of moral injury to beyond, like our emphasis is on servicewomen, but there's moral injury in men, there's moral injury in military, first responders, medical workers can experience moral injury because of the COVID, the limited resources, the kind of decisions that have to be made or that are made. Often doctors and nurses complain that decisions are made too much on the basis of money or insurance rather than what's best for a person, that sort of thing. So the CMIC expands our scope, and we bring in speakers from a variety of different backgrounds, speakers that are doing different kinds of research, interventions, that kind of thing, so that we can expose, moral injury from a broader perspective. Number 2 is every year we publish a new volume of research and support methods. We publish that on Amazon, and we pull together presentations from the conference and other things we've done throughout the year, put them in a book, and then make those available to Amazon. Again, it's a learning tool for people. Number 3, we're analyzing data from the participants in the MI Spouses Research Project, like I mentioned. Number 4, we're looking We are looking for another team member for the Moral Injury and Women Veterans Project. Now that team member, we're primarily looking for somebody with a doctorate who knows about research and can help out. Just help really think deeply, do analysis on that data, and write some articles and things. So that's a project I started. I was very intimately involved. I did all of the interviews for that project and collected the data. I have a great co-researcher in Joanna Kovacic, who was my dissertation mentor. But I had to step away from that project, and that part of the project I just didn't have time to continue. So I want to substitute me for a doctorate person, someone with a PhD, somebody who has some experience in research, who can keep that project moving forward. It is both research projects are very important, and we don't want that data to be lost or them to stale just because one person, we have to change out the team. So finally, we're always seeking donors, sponsors, and volunteers because nonprofit organizations, like any other kind of business, really is always looking for money, always looking for workers, that kind of thing, right? But in nonprofit work, the difference is, it's very difficult for most nonprofits to go to a bank and get a loan like you can for a business. A for-profit business, create a great business plan, you can go in there, get a loan, but nonprofits don't function that way. Nonprofits function on donors, sponsors, volunteers, grants, that kind of thing. And so it's just a different way. We have to get money to keep things going. So we're always looking for donors, sponsors, and volunteers, and that, those are our current operations. So next slide. I think that's the last one. Yep. Okay. So I'm done. I hope you learned something from that or are interested, and I will turn it over to Susan, who will take it from here. And then I guess we're going to take questions at the end.
Okay, next slide, please. This definition of health that's advanced by the WHO, the World Health Organization, resonates so deeply with me. We human beings are complex and multifaceted, and we long for complete physical, mental, and social well-being. As an integrated state, health is a positive condition, and we all want to attain happiness and joy, and not just the absence of disease. Next slide, please. In our first year studying public health, we read Hippocrates and John Snow's writings and their accounts of their researches, which led to the prevention and treatment of several diseases and conditions. And we learned from Dr. Dubé of the landmark CDC Kaiser ACE study, which she just described to us, about investigation of childhood abuse and neglect and household challenges and how that affected people's later life, later health and well-being. So now I'll just talk about how this all applies to my practice experience or internship with missions. Dr. Roberts is my preceptor. This whole experience has become very relevant to me and has strengthened my interest in all the facets of health. Dr. Roberts, as he mentioned, has conducted several studies of moral injury in female veterans, and evidence-based research has informed his interventions and counseling strategies. He takes an interdisciplinary and a holistic approach to supporting servicewomen who have experienced moral injury. And he feels that all healthcare practitioners are likely to encounter persons with moral injury. And as he said, they need to learn to identify it and either help with that person's care or knowledgeably refer them to others for care. Women veterans have been victims of harassment and trauma, which have led to comorbidities like migraines, memory lapses, disability, and depression. And part of our purpose in public health is to promote and protect health for all members of society, especially the most vulnerable. This semester, public health and health sciences students are united in learning more about interprofessional collaboration and teamwork. And through my internship, I'm also learning the importance of joining with various volunteer groups supporting veterans and their families. Through working with Dr. Roberts, I have had the opportunity to write press releases and articles, to conduct an interview, to design a survey, and even to participate in a podcast interview with Dr. Roberts. This kind of real-world involvement is very satisfying. It gives me a glimpse of what it will be like to participate in public health programs when I graduate. It has strengthened my desire to be an advocate for public health, particularly mental and emotional health, and I'm eagerly anticipating my next opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, and thank you, Susan, for presenting and sharing your experiences, and Dr. Roberts for your amazing organization, which I know is helping countless, it is and is going to help countless women and individuals. I'm now going to open up for any questions. They can be entered into the chat. That might be a great way to present them. Otherwise, you can, I guess, raise your hand. It'll be hard to see a hand, though, with so many people. So I think the chat box is the best way to ask questions. Ah, there's one. So the question is, hazing has a very broad definition. What does hazing mean within MISN mission?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's a great question.
So by way of, so for the women I interviewed, hazing could mean physical violence directed against them. Many times, most often, it meant you know, lewd language, name calling, disrespect, that sort of thing. And then you know, when they resisted it or didn't like it, it was like, hey, this is what it means to be part of the team. This is what you got to go through to be part of this team. And for some, it meant, you know, actual sexual assault. So hazing could mean a lot of different things, but it was under the guise of this is what you have to go through to be considered part of the team. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
It's obviously an inappropriate, you know, gateway, but that's kind of how it was used.
Our next question is, when referring to the effects it has on family members or families, could they be affected in a way that would eventually affect future relationships, not just intimate ones?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think when you look at the impact it can have on children, for instance, you know, one story is the husband had an extreme PTSD, and so he had fits of violence, suicide, very risky behavior with money, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of stress in the house, of course. And that was very affected both the spouse and the children. If you've ever grown up in a home with violence, with that degree of stress, that degree of fear, then that can then affect you in your own relationships later as you try to navigate your own marriage or your own relationship. And so that's where it can have almost a generational effect. If you don't see a good model of positive marriage in your home, it's hard to then have a positive marriage in your own marriage. It doesn't mean you can't have one. It doesn't mean that you're doomed to failure or doomed to repeat history, but it does mean you often have to learn or unlearn some behaviors that you saw, or a child can actually end up with some PTS or PTSD as a result of those experiences as a child. And certainly, Dr. Dubé's relationship or research, as she mentioned, connects to those kind of ideas. So it can be this waterfall effect or a generational effect without a lot of training, therapy, coaching, and other kind of intervention or help.
Thank you. So the next question, do you think on gender experiences a higher prevalence of moral injury, or is it pretty even across the board?
I think the context or moral injurious events are different gender-wise. So women, at least the ones we interviewed, and like I said, our participants were 50, so that's a pretty good number. That's a big number of sexual assault, gender harassment, hostile work environment were by far the most prevalent moral injurious experiences they had. For men, it may very well be more oriented, at least from a military context, more oriented to things like combat experiences. The men that had, of the women we interviewed that had PTSD, theirs had a lot to do with constant deployments over and over and over, coupled with combat experience and the constant threat of death. But I don't think it's more or less. Like I wouldn't dare to say more women get moral injury or more men or whatever, but I would say typically the context is different.
Okay, great. There's another question. Within MISN, is moral injury caused primarily by the big T trauma, or can it also be caused by the little t trauma?
That's a great question.
It is a great question.
So what I will say is that trauma, that we saw both, right? We saw and I think I understand big T trauma versus little t, but I'll just say it this way. We saw moral injury that was very related to a very traumatic moral injury experience, like a rape or a gang rape or something like that. Now, rape's not the only one, but that's one that just was very common, right? But it also can happen as a result of trauma after trauma after trauma, buildup of trauma, like many traumas that pile on, right? So moral injury is not necessarily the result of a thing. It can be a result of many things over and over, like a hostile work environment, for instance, that just every single day is just this piling on of harassments and comments and mistreatment and so on. And over time, it can just get too much for a person and they can't handle it. So,
Excellent.
it
I don't see any other questions. Anybody have any other questions? Well, I think that, oh, there's another question. Do you think that trauma could be a reason that women could be turned off to entering into the military?
I think, I think most women probably aren't generally interested in the military because of the perception of what the military is, right? So, I think, but I think that's true with men too. I think overall, a small percentage of people are going to be interested in the military just because, you know, the potential danger, the whatever, everything that people consider the military to be. But I do think there is an element of, over the last few years, we've become much more aware of issues like sexual assault and suicide in the military. And in some ways, our numbers are better than the civilian population, some in some ways worse. And I say we because I'm still in the military. I serve, my day job is in the chaplain corps in the military. So, but I think there is an awareness of it. And I think a lot of people and parents are concerned about what is really going on in the military, you know, and so to what degree that currently affects recruiting, I don't know, but I do think there's much more awareness of it, and of the potential of mistreatment that women can experience in the military. And I think, you know, they are looking for other avenues that might be safer. So without really solid research on being able to say for sure whether that's true or not, I do think there is some truth to more knowledge being that, hey, you know, bad things can happen in the military. Now, I do think the military is a good place for people. I think the military has, like any organization, has some things to work on, but I think there are a lot of good things to be said about the military. So I don't think women overall in large numbers or like, I don't think it, I think the military has improved greatly since over the last couple 2 decades or so in the treatment of women and the treatment of other minority groups. But I do, there's more work to be done.
There's one more question that's come in. And I'd love to hear your response. I have some thoughts myself. Have you worked with people who do not recognize trauma or are in denial? Or do you have to be able, or do they have to be able to identify it before they get help for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It
I think that I work with a woman right now that I would say she's very much commonly in denial of her own trauma. Now, I think she recognizes it now, but so she had some trauma. Try to make this short because I know we're running out of time here, but she had some trauma in her past, and her response to trauma is just to ignore it, shove it down in the back somewhere, pretend like it didn't happen, and keep moving on with your life. But because she had some stress in her home with her husband, there were some problems there. That trauma from years ago, like, appeared in her consciousness, and she just absolutely crashed. I mean, she went from thinking she was okay to being suicidal in a very quick period of time. And it was all this trauma memories and stuff that came up from years ago, that were triggered by her current stresses. So we spent a lot of time just trying to walk through, you know, her accepting of that trauma and thinking about it and recognizing that it could be affecting her. So yeah, I think there are people that, you know, depending on your childhood experiences or what you were taught or whatever, could be a lot of things that don't want to fully, you know, recognize trauma for what it is and how it can affect them, and how, you know, how to get help for it. So
Any other questions? I also want to remind everyone that while we are talking about this topic is very sensitive, that I wanted to remind everyone that there are counseling services available at Wingate. And I'm going to put it in the chat. So the link, find out how to do that.
Hi guys, my name's India. I'm a Lyceum ambassador. I hope you guys enjoyed the Lyceum. Just wanted to let you guys know that I'm going to be posting the link right now. So yes.
Sorry, I just put a link to the counseling services for students at Wingate. You know, feel free to reach out to them. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and thank Dr. Roberts and Susan Saganga. Was there another question? I think, is the Lyceum over? Or can we take more questions?
You can take another question.
I think Niobe White has her hand up, has a hand up.